Welcome to Secrets in the Shadows, where we explore some of the most shocking and unbelievable stories. Today's case will leave you speechless. It's a story of love, betrayal, control, and tragedy. Buckle up, because we're diving deep into the case of the Shafia family murders. Before we begin, I want to warn you. This story deals with some heavy and disturbing topics, including domestic violence, murder, and abuse. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. If you're sensitive to these topics, please proceed with caution. Also, I want to make something clear. Liking this video doesn't mean you approve of what happened. It's just a way to support the channel and help more people learn about stories like this. Now let's get into the case of the Shafia family murders, a story that will leave you questioning everything you think you know about family, culture, and justice. To understand why this tragedy happened, we need to start with the family dynamics. The Shafia family moved to Canada in 2007, leaving Afghanistan behind. It seemed like a chance for a fresh start. A wealthy businessman, Mohammad Shafia, bringing his family to a new country full of opportunities. But behind the facade of success was a deeply fractured family. Mohammad Shafia was the head of the household, and his word was law. He had two wives, Tooba Yahya, the mother of his 7 children, and Rona Amir Mohammad, his first wife, who was treated as a mere relative in Canada. Imagine the tension of living in such a household, especially for Rona, who felt invisible and powerless. Now, let's talk about the daughters, Zainab, Sahar, and Geeti. They were teenagers, growing up in a new culture, surrounded by Western values. They wanted to date, wear modern clothes, and have the freedom to live their lives. But to their father, this behavior was a disgrace. He believed they were tarnishing the family's reputation, and for the Shafia family, reputation or honor was everything. But here's the big question. What does honor even mean? And is it worth more than someone's life? The Shafia daughters, particularly Zainab, were rebellious. Zainab had fallen in love with a young man, and she wasn't afraid to stand up to her father. In fact, she even ran away from home to be with him. For Mohammad Shafia, this was the ultimate betrayal. To him, his daughter's actions, dating, wearing Western clothes, and defying his rules, brought shame upon the family. In his mind, their behavior had tarnished his honor. And in some extreme cases, like this one, maintaining honor becomes more important than anything else, even the lives of your own children. Mohammad believed that the only way to restore his honor was through violence. How could a father feel so disconnected from his children that he'd view them as threats instead of family? But the motive wasn't just about the daughters. Rona, the first wife, also wanted to escape. She had written letters pleading for help, saying she was abused and treated like a servant. She even asked for a divorce, but in Mohammad's eyes, this was yet another betrayal. Divorce, independence, love, these were all seen as threats to his control and his reputation. Should cultural beliefs ever excuse actions like this? And how do we protect vulnerable people in situations like these? Now let's dive deeper into the chilling plan that led to the deaths of 4 innocent women. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. It was a calculated and cold-blooded scheme that took weeks, if not months, to plan. Mohammad Shafia, his second wife Tooba Yahya, and their eldest son Mohammad worked together, each playing a role in the horrifying crime. According to court records and evidence, Mohammad was the mastermind. He had grown increasingly furious with his daughter's defiance and his first wife's pleas for independence. For him, this wasn't just about anger. It was about reclaiming his honor and making a statement. He began discussing the idea of killing them, openly referring to them as a disgrace and saying their deaths would cleanse the family name. But how does a father convince others, his wife and his son, to go along with something so unimaginable? This is where the dynamics of control and fear come into play. Mohammad held absolute authority in the family, and his word was law. Tooba, his second wife, shared his obsession with family honor. And while it's unclear whether she fully agreed with the plan, she didn't resist it. In fact, she she actively helped set the trap. Mohammad, the eldest son, was deeply loyal to his father. As the oldest male child, he had been raised to uphold the family's traditional values, and he likely felt pressured to assist in the murders. He wasn't just an accomplice, he was instrumental in scouting locations, purchasing supplies, and executing the crime. Let's break down the steps they took to carry out their plan. First, they needed a location. Mohammad was tasked with finding a place where the crime could look like an accident. Surveillance footage showed him driving to the Rideau Canal days before the murders, scouting the area, and checking out the locks where the car would later be found. Next, they purchased a second vehicle, a Lexus SUV. The family planned to use this car to follow the victims and make their getaway. Receipts showed they had rented and returned the SUV just before the crime. These details would later become critical pieces of evidence in the investigation. The Shafias also manipulated their victims to ensure they'd be together on the night of the murders. Zainab, who had recently returned to the family after running away, was likely promised reconciliation. Rona, desperate for acceptance and safety, went along with the trip. Sahar and Geeti, the younger daughters, had no choice in the matter. They were controlled at every turn. They even made an effort to maintain appearances. Tooba, for instance, pretended to show concern for her daughter's behavior, painting herself as a caring mother in front of others. But behind closed doors, she was just as involved in the plot. On the night of June 30th, 2009, the Shafia family was returning from a trip to Niagara Falls. It was supposed to be a joyful occasion, but for Mohammad, Tooba, and Mohammad, it was the perfect cover. The four women, Zainab, Sahar, Geeti, and Rona, were coaxed into a black Nissan Sentra under the guise of a family outing. The plan was simple, yet horrific. Drive the car to the canal, incapacitate the victims, and push the vehicle into the water. But let's talk about those moments before the car went into the canal. Evidence suggests that the victims were either unconscious or restrained. Autopsies revealed no signs of struggle, leading experts to believe they were incapacitated before the car was submerged. This raises so many questions, doesn't it? How could three people work together so seamlessly to carry out such a cruel act? Did they ever feel a shred of guilt? And what about the victims? Did they sense something was wrong before it was too late? Once the car was in the water, the Shafias left the scene in the rented SUV. They returned home as if nothing had happened, even filing a missing persons report to make it seem like a tragic accident. But their plan had flaws, and the truth would soon come to light. By morning, the carefully staged accident began to fall apart. On June 30th, 2009, a Parks Canada employee discovered a black Nissan Sentra submerged in the Rideau Canal near Kingston, Ontario. Inside were the lifeless bodies of Zainab, Sahar, Geeti, and Rona, all trapped in the car. The scene was heartbreaking. Four women, silenced forever by those who were supposed to love and protect them. At first glance, it seemed like a tragic car accident, but investigators immediately noticed that things didn't add up. The vehicle was found in an area not commonly used for driving, and the car showed no signs of losing control or skidding. How did it end up in the canal? That question would unravel the Shafia's entire story. When the Shafia family was informed of the deaths, their reaction struck investigators as odd. Instead of displaying grief or shock, Mohammad Shafia seemed cold and detached. He quickly began complaining about his daughter's behavior, calling them disobedient and dishonorable. Who does that when they've just lost family members? The police took note of his lack of remorse. Tooba's behavior was also peculiar. She appeared upset, but her statements were inconsistent. At one moment, she'd describe her daughters as wonderful, and in the next breath, she'd express frustration about their behavior. Meanwhile, Mohammad tried to distance himself from the incident altogether, claiming he had no involvement. But his alibi didn't hold up under scrutiny. As investigators dug deeper, they found several key pieces of evidence that shattered the Shafia's story. Let's start with the surveillance footage. Days before the murders, cameras captured Mohammad driving near the canal, scouting the area. This wasn't a coincidence. It was premeditation. Then, there were the receipts. The family had rented a second vehicle, a Lexus SUV, around the time of the murders. Investigators found that the SUV had minor damage consistent with being used to push the Nissan into the canal. The Shafias returned the rental shortly after the crime, but the evidence was clear. Perhaps the most damning piece of evidence came from wiretaps. Police secretly recorded conversations between the family members, and the recordings were chilling. In one instance, Mohammad Shafia said, "May the devil shit on their graves." Instead of mourning, he was cursing the victims, blaming them for dishonoring the family. These recordings revealed the truth about the family's motives and their total lack of remorse. The autopsies of Zainab, Sahar, Geeti, and Rona revealed critical details. There were no signs of a struggle, and no significant injuries suggested they fought back. Experts believe the victims were incapacitated, possibly unconscious, before the car entered the water. This aligned with evidence that suggested they had been deliberately killed, not caught in an accident. Investigators also found out that Rona had been writing letters to friends, begging for help. In those letters, she detailed the abuse she suffered at the hands of Mohammad and Tooba, saying she feared for her life. These letters painted a horrifying picture of life in the Shafia household and gave more insight into the victims' suffering. Confronted with mounting evidence, the Shafias stuck to their story, claiming the deaths were accidental. But the lies couldn't hold up in court. During the trial, the prosecutors laid out the sequence of events in chilling detail, using surveillance footage, receipts, wiretaps, and testimony from family acquaintances to build an airtight case. The evidence painted a horrifying picture of premeditated murder, driven by a twisted obsession with honor. Witnesses testified about the family's strict rules and Mohammed's anger toward his daughters. One neighbor recalled hearing screams from the home, and others spoke about how the daughters had confided in them, expressing their fear of their father. These testimonies, combined with the physical evidence, sealed the case against Mohammad, Tooba, and Hamed. The trial of Mohammad Shafia, Tooba Yahya, and Hamed Shafia began in October 2011 and lasted for 3 grueling months. It was a landmark case in Canadian history, shedding light on the dark world of so-called honor killings. The courtroom was filled with evidence, testimonies, and shocking revelations that left everyone questioning how such a crime could happen within a family. The prosecution presented a meticulously detailed case. Their argument was clear. Mohammad, Tooba, and Hamed had orchestrated the murders of Zainab, Sahar, Geeti, and Rona to restore what they called family honor. They painted a picture of a patriarch obsessed with control and a family dynamic rooted in fear and repression. The prosecution relied heavily on forensic evidence, including the wiretap recordings where Mohammad was heard condemning his daughters. One of the most damning quotes from Mohammad was, "God curse their generation. They betrayed us immensely." This chilling statement underscored his complete lack of remorse and his deep-seated anger toward the victims. Physical evidence was just as crucial. The rented Lexus SUV had damage that matched the marks on the Nissan Sentra, proving it was used to push the car into the canal. Surveillance footage showed Hamed scouting the area beforehand, leaving no doubt about the premeditated nature of the crime. Receipts and rental records placed the family at the scene and tied them to the vehicles used in the murders. Testimonies from extended family members, friends, and neighbors further revealed the toxic environment within the Shafia household. One relative recalled how Rona had confided in them, saying she feared for her life and that of the girls. In a heart-wrenching letter, Rona wrote, "My life is in danger. Help us." This letter, which she had sent to relatives overseas, became a poignant piece of evidence in the trial. Teachers and friends of the daughters also testified. They described Zainab, Sahar, and Geeti as vibrant, intelligent young women who struggled under the oppressive rules of their father. A teacher remembered how Sahar had once come to school crying, saying she was afraid to go home. Another witness recounted how Geeti had begged to be placed in foster care, saying her life at home was unbearable. The defense, on the other hand, tried to argue that the deaths were accidental. They claimed the four women had gone for a drive and somehow ended up in the canal. They suggested Zainab, who had a learner's permit, might have been driving and lost control of the car. But this story had holes from the start. Forensic experts debunked the accident theory. The canal's edge showed no skid marks or signs of a vehicle losing control. The car's position in the water and the lack of injuries on the victims suggested it had been pushed deliberately. Moreover, the idea that all four women would willingly go for a late-night drive, given the family's strict rules, was implausible. After weeks of emotional testimony and overwhelming evidence, the jury reached their decision. On January 29, 2012, Mohammad Shafia, Tooba Yahya, and Hamid Shafia were each found guilty of 4 counts of first-degree murder. The courtroom was tense as the verdict was read, but for the surviving family members and supporters of the victims, there was a sense of justice. The judge's sentencing statement was powerful. He called the murders despicable and a perverted sense of honor that has no place in Canadian society. He emphasized that no cultural or religious belief could justify such heinous acts. All 3 were sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole for 25 years. This case set a precedent in Canadian law, highlighting the seriousness of honor-based violence and the need to protect vulnerable individuals within oppressive family structures. It also sparked national and international discussions about cultural integration, abuse prevention, and the importance of standing up for those who cannot defend themselves. But this story isn't just about the Shafia family. It's a reminder that behind closed doors, countless others may be suffering in silence. It's up to us as a society to recognize the signs of abuse and intervene before it's too late. The Shafia family murders remain one of the most shocking cases in Canadian history. It wasn't just a crime against individuals, it was a crime against freedom, individuality, and the right to live without fear. 4 lives were brutally taken because of a twisted belief in so-called family honor. But what is honor if it leads to murder? It's a question that still haunts us today. This case shone a light on the dark realities of honor-based violence, an issue that crosses cultural, religious, and national boundaries. It forced many to confront uncomfortable truths about how deeply ingrained cultural beliefs can lead to unimaginable consequences. For Canada, the case served as a wake-up call, prompting discussions on how to better support victims of abuse and prevent such tragedies in the future. One of the most important outcomes of this case was the conversation it started. Advocacy groups and policymakers began working on measures to combat honor-based violence. Campaigns were launched to educate communities about recognizing and reporting abuse. Schools, community centers, and law enforcement agencies became more aware of the unique challenges victims of honor-based violence face. But there's still work to be done. Around the world, women and young girls continue to suffer under oppressive family dynamics. Some are silenced forever, just like Zainab, Sahar, Geeti, and Rona. Their deaths remind us that we must remain vigilant in identifying abuse, supporting victims, and holding perpetrators accountable. If you or someone you know is experiencing abuse or feels trapped in a dangerous situation, please know that help is available. Organizations like the National Domestic Violence Hotline, local women's shelters, and community advocacy groups are there to listen and support you. You don't have to face this alone. And to everyone watching, if you see signs of abuse, don't hesitate to act. Sometimes, a kind word or a simple offer of help can make all the difference. Remember, it's better to speak up and be wrong than to stay silent and let tragedy unfold. As we reflect on this case, let's honor the memory of Zainab, Sahar, Geeti, and Rona by committing to a world where everyone has the right to live freely and safely. Their story, though heartbreaking, is a call to action for all of us. It's a reminder that even in the darkest times, there's hope for change. Before we wrap up, don't forget to like this video to help raise awareness about important stories like this one. It doesn't mean you support what happened. It shows you care about sharing the message and standing against abuse. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an important story. We're committed to bringing you insightful and thought-provoking content. Thank you for watching, and let's work together to create a safer, more compassionate world. Take care, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next video.